I'm going to show you how to use phase animations in SwiftUI. And the example we're going to build is this bell ringing animation for notification. And to put it simply, phase animations allow you to chain animations together in phases, and you can customize each phase with the animation curve and the speed to really dial in a great animation. Today's video is sponsored by Play and their new Play to Xcode feature. You can create view components or entire screens in Play with animations and interactions, export it to Xcode as a Swift package, and now you can use these views in your app without having to rebuild them in code, which saves you so much time. More on this later. Here I am in Xcode with my very basic starter project, right? It's an HStack that has a button that says notify me, as you see over there, and an image with the SF symbol of a bell. Pretty straightforward, but I want to focus on these phase animations. And to introduce the concept, we're going to start with a dead simple example, and then we'll get a little more advanced with this bell ringing animation. All right, so for the basic one, we're going to do this on the notify me button. So we'll do .PhaseAnimator. This is a modifier, as you can see, and we have two major options. You can see phases and content, and then there's this optional animation block, and then you see phases trigger content with the optional animation block. So the main difference between these two is if you have phases without a trigger, it's just gonna continuously repeat this animation over and over and over again. If you use the trigger parameter, that is going to be just a one-time animation based on an action or a trigger, which is what we're doing when we tap this notify me button. We get this little bell animation once and then it goes back, boom, that's done. So use trigger for that. For the basic one, let's start off with just content. Now phases, as you can see, is a sequence. So for this very basic one, we're just gonna do true and false, and this is an array. So we're gonna create a pulsing animation on this button, and this is gonna have two phases, basically on or off. So the content here is going to be the actual button, but we just call it content, and then this is the phase. So for each phase, we want to do something to the content. In this case, we're gonna up the scale, to 1.2, back down to 1. So it's gonna be a slight pulsing animation on the button. And I know I'm going fast, but I'm gonna come back and review this when we're done, and then we're gonna do it again with a more advanced example. It's not actually that complicated, so I'm pretty confident you'll understand by the end of the video. All right, so the content, our button, we want to add a .scale effect. And if phase is true, that's the phase here that we're passing through here in the closure. If phase is true, go ahead and give me 1.2 for the scale. If not, 1.0. This creates a subtle pulsing effect that you're gonna see there in the preview. There you go. So again, we define two phases. In phase 1, we're at a scale of 1.2. In phase 2, we're at a scale of 1.0. And we just constantly iterate through this array of phases, right? It doesn't have to be two phases, true, false. You could have 17 phases in here with 17 different states if you wanted a really complex animation. But for the super basic example, we just have one with this pulsing animation. And you can animate whatever you want, whether it's opacity or the offset. We just chose scale effect, for the example, but you can animate whatever you want here, as long as it's animatable, of course. But that optional animation block we were talking about, because what you see over there is the default animation. What if we wanted to adjust the timing of it or make it a springy animation? Well, that's what we can do here. So phase, and we'll use the .spring animation with a duration of 3. Now this is going to be a much slower animation after my preview updates. You can see it very subtly, slowly, almost like it's breathing, or you can do 0.3 to go back to that more fast pulsing animation as soon as the preview updates here. And there it goes. There's that pretty fast in your face pulsing animation. But to recap, for PhaseAnimator, you define your phases. In this simple one, we have true, false, on, off. There's only 2 different phases. You define what you want to do in each of those phases. Now we're only doing something if phase is true or phase is false. Again, if you had 10 phases, you'd have to handle all 10 phases on what you want to do to the button. And then this optional animation block, you can customize whatever animation you want in there. If I delete it or you don't have it, you're just going to get the default animation, that you see over there. If you do want to add a different animation curve and timing, add that animation block. Okay, so that's super basic example. Let's build this bell notification that you see here, which is a little more complex. All right, so I'm gonna comment this out because I don't want that thing pulsating at me the rest of the tutorial. It'll drive me nuts. But let's go down to our image here, because this is where we're gonna put the phase animator for the trigger. Now trigger, content, animation. We're gonna go ahead and just do the content for now. We're gonna add the animation block later. We're gonna kind of do it in steps here. So hit return. Now, the phases, this is a sequence. Before we did true, false, because we only had 2. This time we're gonna have 4 phases. And when you have multiple phases like this, it really makes sense to put them into an enum because it's gonna make your code a lot more readable, as you'll see here in a little bit. And in my opinion, it's easier to reason about as you're defining the states of the animation. That may be confusing right now. Give me a second, you'll see. So let's define this enum down here. It's an enum, we'll just call it notify animation phase. And we want this to conform to case iterable, because if you remember, these phases are an array. So with case iterable on an enum, basically gives all your cases into an array. So we're going to use like, notify, or we're actually not going to use this, but all cases. You could use this. In our special circumstances, we're not. We'll get back to that. But okay, so it's case iterable. What are our phases? Well, let's break down the animation here. As you can see, we start off in an initial phase, static, it's not doing anything. The first thing we do in the animation is we lift it up, and then it shakes back and forth a little bit, and then we return to that initial phase. So that's kind of the breakdown of what we're trying to do. So those are going to be our cases in our enum. So we'll say the first case is initial. The second case is lift, we lift it up. And then the next case is shake left, and then shake right. So that's the first step in our phase animator, right? We have to have an array of phases. Again, in our super simple example, we just had two, true, false. In this example, we're gonna iterate through initial, lift, shake left, shake right. And because we're doing the trigger, that's only gonna go through once. If we deleted this trigger parameter or didn't use a trigger, that would just repeat over and over and over again. So onto that trigger, we need to trigger this somehow. Well, that's gonna be on the button tap, the notify me here, this coming soon. We're gonna need a state variable for that. Very typical SwiftUI button stuff. At state, private var, good autocomplete. Is notified equals false. So when we tap the button notify me, we'll say is notified dot toggle. That'll toggle that, which will then trigger this animation. And then every time we tap the button, that animation will play. So the trigger is going to be is notified. And then the content, just like before, we have content and then phase. So this is where the enum also comes into play, because you can see we're gonna have all these phases. We have 4 of them down here. Well, we would have to have a giant switch statement saying when phase is initial, have this state. When phase is lift, move the X offset up by 30 pixels. When it's shake left, adjust the rotation. So rather than having a giant switch statement in here, which again will make your view code pretty cluttered, we're gonna abstract that away to this enum with some computed properties. So not only does it clean up the code, I think it's easier to reason about your animation when everything is right here. Let me show you. So what we're defining here is the property values during each phase. So we know we wanna lift it up. So that's gonna be the Y offset. So I can say var Y offset, and it'd be a CG float. So we can switch off of self, and then we get the autocomplete case initial. Oh, I autocompleted too soon. Case initial, return 0. I don't like all these returns. I like being able to do this, especially with these simple ones. So during the initial phase, it's the baseline, 0. We're not moving the Y offset. That's perfect. During the lift phase, we want to change the Y offset, not to -10. Let's do -30. We want it to be a little more drastic. And then same thing for shake left and shake right. They're both -30 because when the bell's up there, it's shaking back and forth. The offset is still the same. Now, what I'm going to do here, just for your ease of understanding, and I think it's easier to understand as you're walking through your animation, is I'm going to leave these spelled out, right? Because of course you could put lift.shake left.shake right all on the same line and get rid of this, to make your code more concise. By all means, if you want to do that, go ahead. But for the sake of the tutorial and understanding the process, I'm going to leave this all spelled out. So let's copy and paste this because we defined our Y offset for each state of our animation. So the other properties we're animating are the scale. We're going to scale it up a little bit as it lifts. So I can say scale. And for the initial scale is 1. And when we lift it, it is 1.2. Same thing while it's up there shaking 1.2. And while it's up there shaking 1.2. Again, you could put these on the same line. I'm leaving it spelled out. So again, our animation, we lift it up we changed the Y offset by -30. During that, we scale it up to 1.2. Now we got to shake it back and forth. So that is the rotation degrees. So again, I'm going to copy and paste this down here. This is the last one we're doing. So rotation degrees, that is a double. So I want to rotate during the initial is 0, right? There's no rotation going on during the initial state. And while we're lifting it, there's also no rotation going on. Okay, so when we shake left, I want to shake it -30 degrees and shake right +30 degrees. That's how we get the left and right. So again, what we defined here, we're changing 3 properties in our animation, right? We're changing the Y offset because we're lifting it, we're changing the scale because we're scaling it up a little bit, and then we're changing the rotation because we're shaking it back and forth. Now, for every phase of the animation, we need to define those properties, and that's what we do here. So for the initial phase, Y offset 0. For all the rest of the phases, lift, shake left, shake right, -30. And you do that for each property. Now again, this just refactors it away so you don't have this giant switch statement right here. Because now look how nice the code looks. Content.scale effect is phase.scale. And then let me type out the rest and I'll explain this in case you're not familiar with what's going on here. Rotation, nice autocomplete. Phase.rotation degrees, and then offset phase.y offset. So again, we are iterating through this entire array of phase, all cases, initial, lift, shake left, shake right. For each one, we return a phase. So that's how we know what phase we're in. We know if we're in initial, we know if we're in lift, we know if we're in shake left. And then that way we can just do phase.scale because the phase we're on, it'll pull this scale. So if we're on the shake left phase, I know the scale is going to be 1.2. And if we're on the shake left phase, I know the rotation should be -30. So that's how we are applying the proper value based on what phase we're in to the scale effect, to the rotation effect, and to the Y offset. Now, this is going to give us a very basic animation. We got some customization to do, but let's test it out. So I'm going to tap notify me. There you go. It lifts, it shakes, it comes down. Okay, so you notice it's very slow. It's not very good looking. It only shakes once. Maybe that's what you want. I want it to shake back and forth a couple times, and I want to adjust the timing in each phase. Maybe you want it to be a little bouncy, springy. So when you don't customize the animation, you just get that default animation like you see here. Kind of boring, doesn't look that great. So let's start customizing these animations. But before we do this, I want to add some extra shakes to it. So there's two ways to go about this. You could add a shake left again, shake right again, and give it its proper values. That way you can keep this all cases, or you can redefine this array here. We're not going to do all cases. We're going to do notify animation phase dot initial. This is where you can basically list out your order of operations here. Notify animation phase dot lift, notify animation phase dot shake left, notify animation phase dot shake right. Okay, so that just repeated what we have, except now what I want to do is add some extra shakes in there, a little extra shake left, shake right. And we'll do 3. And you can make it shake as much as you want, whatever you think feels good. So now when I hit notify me, we're still gonna have the bad animation, but it's shaking right, shaking left a lot, which is what we want. Now you'll notice, look when it shakes. We can adjust the anchor of the rotation, so it looks like the bell is shaking here. So on the rotation effect degrees, we can add comma, anchor dot top, and then now hit notify me. Now the bell looks like it's properly shaking there too, okay? But the timing is still off. It's not bouncy, it's not springy. It doesn't look that fun. That's where we can, again, customize each phase in the animation closure, which is optional, you don't have to have it. Now we can go through each phase, give it a special animation curve, give it a duration, a timing. So here we will do the switch just to show you what I meant by a giant switch statement in your view code. Switch must be exhaustive, let's fix that. Okay, so initial, lift, shake left, shake right. So for the initial, I want to do dot spring with a bounce of 0.5. And again, I've dialed in these animations. Like I said, when you're building these, you're going to really play around with these numbers, tweak it, test some different animation curves, test some different timings. And I actually want to do the same thing for the dot lift. So we'll put those all on the same line. For shake left and shake right, again, we're going to put these on the same line. We want dot ease in out with a duration of 0.15. So we kept the default speed for the lift and the spring, but we sped up the bell shaking, right? The bell shaking slowly was what kind of threw the animation off. So now when I hit notify me, it's a little more bouncy. The bell shakes pretty fast and then it bounces back. I think there's one too many shakes in there, right? It makes it a long animation. So let's go back up to here, this PhaseAnimator, our array, because right, this is what we're iterating through. Let's delete one shake left and shake right, just to eliminate one ring of the bell, if you will. Hit notify me, let's see this, boom, boom. Yeah, that's what I want. That's a cool animation. Boom, quick little shake, right back down. Very good. Now you could refactor this out as well, just like we did these computed properties. Have a computed property called animation. That way you can just return phase.animation, which really keeps your view code nice and clean. But this switch statement isn't all that bad, so I kept it there. Again, that's a personal preference. So phase animations, you get to determine your phases, and then during each phase, you say what properties you want to change on the image in this case. And you can also go through each phase and change the animation curve and the timing of it, all with this PhaseAnimator modifier. And if you're into making awesome animations, I think you're gonna love today's sponsor, Play, and their new Play to Xcode feature. It allows you to create view components, animation interactions, and even entire screens in their design tool, and then import them to Xcode as a package so you can easily use your designs in your code base without having to rebuild them in code. For example, let's say you design this nice card view in Play. You obsess over every detail, and it's exactly what you want it to be. Now you can just export your designs right into Xcode as that Swift package. You have this card view right there. You didn't have to rebuild it. That's such a time saver. And you can build an entire screen if you like, and these views are reusable, as you can see. You can configure all the text on the screen, you can change the background image, and again, all animations and interactions you built in Play are already there in Xcode as well. So if you really like to dial in your designs in a design tool before you hop into code and build them, Play is for you. It's going to save you so much time. And Play is a design tool that uses SwiftUI concepts like VStack, HStack, etc. It integrates right in with Apple's human interface guidelines and more. Like, it's very SwiftUI native. I did a video all about them before. The link will be in the description, but I'm really excited to share this new Play to Xcode feature with you. Again, it can be a huge time saver. Check it out. Link is in the description.